The day America almost ran out of oil, the crisis that changed the nation forever. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the gas stations in your city are empty. Cars are lined up for blocks. People are waiting for hours. Arguments break out. Businesses begin to panic. And across the country, millions of Americans are asking the same question: what happened? Today, running out of fuel sounds almost impossible. But in the 1970s, America faced a crisis that shocked the nation. A crisis that affected nearly every family. A crisis that exposed just how dependent the United States had become on oil. For months, gas stations ran dry, prices skyrocketed, the economy struggled, and the American way of life suddenly seemed uncertain. This is the story of the 1973 energy crisis, the moment America realized that one of the world's most powerful countries could still be vulnerable, and how a shortage of oil changed the nation forever. America's love affair with oil. By the early 1970s, oil was everywhere. Cars needed it. Factories needed it. Airplanes needed it. Homes needed it. America had become one of the largest consumers of oil in human history. The country was booming. Families drove larger cars. Road trips became part of American culture. Suburbs expanded rapidly. The economy relied heavily on cheap energy. Few people questioned where all this oil came from. As long as gas stations stayed full, everything seemed fine. But beneath the surface, a dangerous dependency was growing. America was becoming increasingly reliant on foreign oil, and the dependency would soon create one of the biggest economic shocks in modern history. A war thousands of miles away. In October 1973, conflict erupted in the Middle East. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack against Israel. The war quickly attracted international attention. The United States supported Israel. Several Arab oil-producing nations strongly opposed this decision. They decided to use something incredibly powerful as a weapon: oil. The Organization of Arab Petroleum exporting countries announced restrictions on oil exports. Production was reduced. Shipments were limited. Suddenly, less oil was reaching global markets, and the effects were immediate. Panic at the pump. Within weeks, Americans began noticing something unusual. Gas stations were running out of fuel. Lines became longer every day. Drivers waited for hours. Some stations closed completely. Others imposed strict limits on how much fuel customers could buy. News cameras captured scenes that looked unbelievable. Cars stretched for blocks. People argued over their place in line. Businesses worried about transportation costs. Truck drivers feared losing income. The nation was shocked. Many Americans had never imagined that fuel could become scarce. Yet suddenly, shortages were everywhere, and the situation continued to worsen. The economy begins to shake. As oil supplies tightened, prices surged. Everything became more expensive. Transportation costs increased. Manufacturing costs increased. Heating costs increased. Businesses struggled to adapt. Families suddenly faced higher expenses. Inflation accelerated. Economic growth slowed. The combination created a painful situation. People were paying more while the economy weakened. Experts began warning that America was entering dangerous territory. The energy crisis was no longer just about fuel. It was becoming an economic crisis. The government responds. The federal government faced enormous pressure. Americans demanded solutions. Leaders searched for ways to reduce consumption. New policies were introduced. One of the most famous was the national speed limit. The maximum speed limit was reduced to 55 miles per hour. Officials believed slower speeds would save fuel. Energy conservation campaigns appeared across the country. Citizens were encouraged to drive less, use less electricity, and conserve energy whenever possible. For many Americans, these changes felt strange. The country had become accustomed to abundance. Now people were being told to limit consumption. The crisis was changing daily life. The car industry's wake-up call. Few industries felt the impact more than automobile manufacturers. For years, large vehicles dominated American roads. Big engines, heavy cars, high fuel consumption. But consumers suddenly wanted something different. Fuel efficiency became important. Smaller vehicles gained popularity. Foreign manufacturers began attracting attention. Japanese automakers, in particular, saw new opportunities. Cars that once seemed too small for American tastes now appeared practical. The energy crisis reshaped consumer behavior, and it permanently changed the automotive industry. A nation reevaluates its future. As the crisis continued, Americans began asking difficult questions. Could the country remain dependent on foreign energy? What would happen if another crisis occurred? How could future shortages be prevented? These concerns sparked major discussions about energy security. New investments were proposed. Alternative energy sources received more attention. Government agencies studied long-term solutions. The crisis forced America to think differently. For the first time, energy independence became a major national goal. The human side of the crisis behind the headlines were ordinary people. Families changed travel plans. Workers worried about commuting. Small businesses struggled with rising costs. Many Americans remembered the uncertainty, the waiting, the frustration, the fear that shortages could become even worse. For younger generations today, it may seem difficult to imagine, but during those months, fuel became one of the most talked about subjects in the country. The crisis touched nearly every aspect of daily life, and its psychological impact was enormous. The crisis begins to ease. Eventually, conditions improved, oil supplies stabilized, markets adjusted, the most severe shortages ended, gas stations slowly returned to normal operations, the long lines disappeared, Americans once again gained access to reliable fuel. But something had changed. The nation had learned a powerful lesson. Resources that seemed unlimited could suddenly become scarce. Dependence carried risks. And preparation mattered. The crisis was ending, but its influence would remain for decades. The legacy of 1973 today. Nearly every major American energy policy has roots connected to the lessons of the 1973 crisis. Strategic oil reserves were expanded. Energy efficiency standards improved. Alternative energy research increased. Government planners developed new emergency strategies. The crisis fundamentally changed how America thinks about energy. It influenced politics, economics, technology, transportation, and national security. Few events have had such a widespread impact on modern American life. Looking back, the 1973 energy crisis was about much more than gasoline. It was about vulnerability. It was about dependence. And it was about how quickly everyday life can change when a critical resource becomes scarce. Millions of Americans experienced something they never expected: long lines, empty pumps, economic uncertainty. Yet from that challenge came important lessons that continue shaping policy and innovation even today. Because sometimes the events that change history are not wars, not elections, not inventions. Sometimes they begin with something as simple as a gas station running out of fuel. And when that happened in 1973, America learned a lesson it would never forget. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to Hidden Nexus for more untold stories from history, technology, engineering, and the events that shaped the modern world. Because history isn't just about what happened, it's about understanding why it happened and how it continues to affect us today. And perhaps that is the most fascinating part of this story, because the 1973 energy crisis did not end when the gas stations filled back up. In many ways, its impact is still being felt today. Every time governments discuss energy security, every time fuel prices suddenly rise, every time world leaders debate oil production. The lessons of 1973 quietly return. The crisis forced America to confront a reality it had ignored for decades. Resources are powerful, sometimes more powerful than armies, more powerful than borders, and more powerful than politics. Because without energy, modern society struggles to function. Cars stop moving, factories slow down, supply chains break apart, and economies begin to suffer. The energy crisis revealed just how connected everything had become. A conflict thousands of miles away could affect families living in small American towns. A political decision in one part of the world could influence prices in another. For many Americans, this realization was shocking. The world suddenly felt smaller and far more interconnected. But while the crisis exposed weaknesses, it also inspired innovation. Engineers began searching for better solutions. Scientists explored alternative energy sources. Automakers redesigned vehicles. Governments invested in new technologies. The desire to avoid another crisis became a powerful force for change. And over time, those efforts transformed entire industries. Many of the fuel-efficient vehicles we see today exist because of lessons learned during the 1970s. Many energy policies were shaped by decisions made after the crisis. Even renewable energy projects owe part of their history to that period of uncertainty. Sometimes major progress begins with major problems. And the energy crisis was certainly a major problem, yet it pushed America to think differently, to prepare differently, and to plan for the future in ways it never had before. Perhaps that is why historians continue studying this period, because it wasn't simply an economic event. It was a turning point, a moment when an entire nation realized that prosperity could not be taken for granted, that stability required preparation, and that even the most powerful countries must constantly adapt to changing circumstances. Today, younger generations often hear stories about people waiting in line for fuel. They see old photographs of crowded gas stations. They watch historical footage of frustrated drivers. And many find it difficult to imagine. After all, modern life feels different. Technology has advanced, infrastructure has improved, and energy systems have evolved. Yet the core lesson remains surprisingly relevant. The systems we depend on every day are often invisible. We rarely think about them until something goes wrong. The energy crisis reminded America of that truth, and perhaps that is why the story remains important, because history is not only about remembering the past, it is also about recognizing patterns, understanding risks, and preparing for challenges that may lie ahead. The people who lived through the crisis never forgot those lessons, and nearly half a century later, the world continues learning from them. Because the day America almost ran out of oil was not just a story about fuel, it was a story about vulnerability, adaptation, innovation, and resilience. A story that continues shaping the modern world even today. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to Hidden Nexus for more fascinating stories about history, technology, innovation, and the events that changed our world forever. Because sometimes the biggest moments in history don't begin with a war. They begin with an ordinary person discovering that something they always depended on has suddenly disappeared. And when that happens, history can change overnight.